said, we've never heard the other side. That's in part our fault, is that we've not been out there and talking about and changing the beat of the drum from this anti-American, anti-Israel stance to telling people what the West is all about.
You know, just to know the history of Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera was the first station to actually interview Israeli officials, the first Arabic station. And 4 years ago and 3 years ago, in the Arab world, it was accused of being an Israeli station. Last year and the year before, Libya pulled their ambassadors from Qatar, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria,
right.
4 northern African countries. So every time they air something unpopular, it's accused of being anti that government, and that is not fair. Many Arab countries and many Arab, in the Arabic press, they attacked Al Jazeera for interviewing Israeli officials, which was a taboo. You could not do that. Now that they air Bin Laden, we accuse them of being puppets or working for Bin Laden as his PR arm.
But that's because they are truly independent.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that they don't also reflect, as you were saying, their viewership. And they have been viciously, they refer
They're biased, but it's from the groundswell.
Right. I mean, they refer to Palestinians who die in terrorist attacks as martyrs. That's a little biased. They spread the rumor that the Jews in New York did not go to work in the World Trade Center on September 11th, feeding the idea in a large part of the Islamic world that it was...
I'm not here to defend or attack Al Jazeera. I don't know enough about them. What I'm suggesting, though, is that who among us, when you talk about networks, is not biased? You're going to tell me that the networks that we all represent aren't slanted, that the papers we read aren't slanted, that the editorials that we read aren't slanted? Who among us is not biased when it comes to news coverage? My point is that the administration, and again, I think they've done a good job on balance of managing these terror attacks against our country, these diabolical attacks. Right. My point is, though, you can't have it both ways. You can't tell me that Al Jazeera is the devil incarnate, and at the same time send Condi and send Colin Powell over there to be interviewed on their network. You can't. It seems to me you can't have it both ways.
When they are promoting that we are the greatest Satan out there, and there's only propaganda on one side, and they hate us so much to the point that they're willing to kill us, that's a problem. That's when you have
the videotape of the women and children and young
people not doing that.
Hopping up and down when they saw the World Trade Center go down.
No,
this is not propaganda. This is not from a centralized government that's coming in to try to convince people to hate us. They hate us already.
To some degree, respectfully, though, it is propaganda in this sense. In the sense that what you see on television does not represent the millions of folk who live in that part of the world. Again, I'm not here to defend people in the Middle East. What I'm suggesting is if you see 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 people in the streets protesting, that is not necessarily the view that's held by the millions of folk who you don't see on television.
Correct, but it's not also just the people in the street. Okay, it's not just a few thousand. Let's not kid ourselves about that either.
Culturally,
I think that world is divided. But it's divided a lot more evenly than we want to admit in this country, as you were saying.
That's my point.
Now, let me ask again about the Bin Laden tape. Isn't the correct answer to propaganda from the other side not to censor it, but to refute it? I mean, wouldn't it be easy for the president to get on and say to Mr. Bin Laden, here are your points. Let me tell you why you're full of crap.
Because actually, that's absolutely the point. Al Jazeera said that, and they said that in different stations here in America, and the Washington Post today, that they went after the State Department for the last few weeks asking someone to appear on Al Jazeera, and they refused. 2 years ago, I was in Qatar visiting with a congressional delegation. We met with the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador in Qatar, and she complained to us about Al Jazeera. And we said simply, did you try to respond to their reports? She said, no. We had a meeting at Al Jazeera. We went there just the same day in the afternoon. And they said, the U.S. Embassy is complaining. Why aren't you fair? And they said, every time we have a report, we ask them to respond. They refused. They do not send a spokesperson. They don't come. So the problem that we don't want to have.
But I can tell you this, though. In my conversation last week with one of the network executives, or executive very high up at Al Jazeera, I asked him specifically, I had him on the same day, Bill, that Bush released those 22 photos of the 22 most wanted terrorists in the world. And I asked him point blank whether or not their network, Al Jazeera, was prepared to run footage of these 22 persons who are the most wanted, at least by U.S. standards. And he hemmed and hawed and hedged all around that question. I found that extremely troubling, that if, in fact, you are a network that's trying to be biased, and trying to be balanced, why would you not air as often as you could these 22 faces?
If they refer to people who we think of as suicidal terrorists as martyrs, obviously those people are not on a most wanted list. They're on a most desired list.
Well, I think that's wrong if they did that. I don't know that.
They ought to be running that footage. They ought to be running that. They ought to be running as often as they can if they really. And I asked him, would you run this? He says, well, if it has. His response was, if it has some news value. I said, if it has news value. That's ridiculous to me. Of course it has news value.
I have to take something for commercial value.
We want to end these problems because you can't create another problem unless you have a long-term policy. We did not. We armed the Afghans. We spent $45 billion, half of the arms they have, we gave them. Then when the Russians left, we just disappeared. Right. So we left a vacuum. This is what happened there. We armed Iraq against Iran. Then we left. Then Iraq attacked Kuwait. Then we sent our planes killing 200,000 civilians. In Middle East, they mean lives to them. For us in America, they are numbers.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything in America. But for people in Middle East, 200,000 civilians were killed in 1991. Every year, 200,000-300,000, according to the UN, children die from starvation, lack of medicine. For people in the Middle East, that means something. There is some brainwash, but there is some truth.
The sad irony.
You have to look at the problem. You have to look why people can be brainwashed.
My point is that this is like a bar fight, okay?
Really well said. James, I got to take a commercial. We'll be back to that in a second.